Elena Carter had never felt so out of place in her life. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and champagne towers, laughter spilling across polished marble floors. Everywhere she looked, there were men in tailored tuxedos and women in gowns worth more than her yearly salary. The gala was everything her best friend Lila had promised: grand, extravagant, enthralling, with the kind of people Elena only ever read about in glossy magazines. And there she was, perched at the edge of it all, clutching a glass of sparkling water like it was an anchor. "Relax," Lila had whispered when they walked in earlier, tugging at Elena's hand. "You look gorgeous. Nobody will even notice you're not one of them." That was the problem. Nobody had noticed her. 2 hours in, Lila had vanished into a crowd of friends and admirers, leaving Elena stranded at a table tucked near the corner. She tried to remind herself why she'd agreed to this. Lila had gotten the invitations through her father, a retired senator who still had connections. "It'll be fun," she'd said. "You might meet someone important. Maybe even an art donor." That last part had swayed her. Elena wasn't a socialite, but she was ambitious. As an assistant curator at a small gallery, she dreamed of expanding her reach, of bringing hidden talent to light. If rubbing shoulders with the wealthy meant more funding for the arts, then she could endure one evening of feeling invisible. Still, as she watched couples swirl across the dance floor, she felt smaller by the second. Her gaze drifted to the man everyone seemed to gravitate toward, the one she had recognized instantly. Alexander Grant. Even from across the ballroom, he had presence. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a black tuxedo that probably cost more than her car, he stood surrounded by politicians, CEOs, and investors. His dark hair was neatly combed back, and there was an air about him that made people lean in when he spoke. The tabloids painted him as ruthless in business, untouchable in personal life. A billionaire who kept his circle tight and his heart even tighter. He looked as if he belonged to another world. Elena tore her eyes away and focused on the bubbles rising in her glass. Men like him didn't notice women like her. But someone else had noticed her. At the next table, Richard Hale leaned back in his chair, his smile sharp as a blade. She didn't know who he was yet, only that he'd been watching her. When she shifted uncomfortably, he lifted his glass in a silent toast before turning to speak with a senator at his side. She exhaled in relief, but unease lingered. It was in that moment, when she was trying to shrink into her chair, that a shadow fell across her. "Care for a dance?" Her head snapped up. Standing before her was none other than Alexander Grant himself. His hand extended, palm open, waiting. For a heartbeat, she thought she had imagined it. Why would a man like him notice her, much less ask her to dance? She glanced around, half expecting to see another woman behind her. But no, his eyes, piercing gray, steady and unreadable, were on her. I don't think," she stammered, heat rushing to her cheeks. He tilted his head slightly, the hint of a smile ghosting across his lips. "It's just a dance. Unless you'd rather sit here hiding from everyone all night." Her breath caught. Hiding. So he'd noticed that. Against every nervous instinct, Elena set her glass down and slipped her hand into his. His grip was firm but not unkind as he led her toward the dance floor. Whispers followed them. She felt the weight of countless eyes as they stepped into the center, the music swelling around them. "You know everyone's staring," she murmured, trying to keep her voice steady. "They always stare," Alexander replied smoothly. "Tonight, it happens to be at you." Her heart tripped over itself. He guided her into the rhythm with ease, his movements precise and confident. She wasn't an experienced dancer, but somehow he made her feel like she belonged there, her steps fitting naturally into his. For the first time that evening, Elena wasn't invisible. She was the center. "So," he said after a moment, his gaze never leaving hers, "what's your name?" "Elena Carter." "Not from this circle, I assume." Her laugh came out soft and nervous. "That obvious." "Obvious," he said, and refreshing. She blinked. "Refreshing. Most people at these events come rehearsed. You don't." "I didn't realize I was supposed to rehearse," she muttered, then winced at her own bluntness. To her surprise, his lips curved in the faintest trace of amusement. "Exactly my point." As they moved across the floor, she became aware of Richard Hale again, watching them with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. He leaned close to the senator beside him, whispering something that made the man stiffen. Elena's skin prickled. She remembered then what she'd overheard earlier in the evening when passing by Richard's table, something about a deal sealed before the regulators catch wind. At the time, she'd brushed it off as business jargon she didn't understand. Now, with his gaze fixed on her like a hawk, it felt heavier. Alexander must have noticed her distraction. His voice dropped low, meant only for her. Don't look so worried. He thrives on it. Her head snapped back to him. You mean Richard? His expression didn't change. You know who he is. No, not really. Should I? Alexander's jaw tightened slightly. Not tonight. Tonight you only need to worry about keeping up with the music. Her pulse quickened, not just from the dance but from the way his words carried weight, as if there was something dangerous lurking beneath the glittering surface of the gala. When the song slowed to an end, applause rippled across the room. Alexander released her hand but lingered for just a second longer than necessary, his eyes locked on hers. You've caught attention tonight, he said quietly. Not all of it good. Before she could ask what he meant, he stepped back, inclining his head politely before someone else pulled him into conversation. She stood there breathless, heart pounding, surrounded by stares she couldn't decipher. And from the corner, Richard Hale's smirk widened. Elena couldn't shake his words. You've caught attention tonight. Not all of it good. The music had changed, couples spinning gracefully around her, but Elena remained rooted at the edge of the dance floor. She should have felt flattered that Alexander Grant had not only noticed her but chosen her to dance with. Instead, her chest buzzed with unease. When she finally returned to her table, Lila appeared, cheeks flushed from dancing. Where did you go? Lila asked, fanning herself with a napkin. Then her eyes widened. Wait, was that you dancing with Alexander Grant? Elena gave a weak smile. I think so. You think so? Elena, half the women here would sell their jewels for one dance with that man. Elena wanted to laugh, but her throat felt tight. Across the room, she could still feel Richard Hale's gaze, heavy and cold. She tried to shrug it off. It was just a dance. But nothing about Alexander's presence felt just. Later in the evening, when the champagne had flowed freely and the crowd had grown louder, Elena slipped out onto the terrace for air. The night was cooler, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the grand estate. She leaned against the railing, finally able to breathe. You don't like crowds? She startled, spinning to find Alexander stepping out of the shadows. His jacket was gone, his tie loosened. Without the formality of the ballroom, he looked less like a figure on the cover of a magazine and more like a man, still intimidating, but human. I guess I don't hide it well, she said softly. He studied her for a moment. That's why you stand out. Her heart gave a nervous skip. Why me? Out of everyone in that room, why ask me to dance? Something flickered in his eyes, something almost vulnerable. Because you weren't asking for it. Everyone else is always asking. Elena looked down at her hands. She wanted to believe him, but suspicion tugged at her. Men like him didn't single out women like her without a reason. You should be careful, he added, his voice dropping lower. Richard Hale doesn't take kindly to being ignored. Her head jerked up. He was watching me. He was watching us, Alexander corrected. And when Richard watches, it's never harmless. Before Elena could press for more, the terrace doors swung open. Richard Hale himself emerged, a glass of scotch in hand, his smile thin. Grant, Richard drawled, his eyes sliding to Elena. Introducing yourself to new friends, I see. Alexander's posture stiffened, though his tone stayed polite. Just making conversation. Richard circled them like a predator, gaze lingering on Elena. Miss Carter, she said quietly. Carter, Richard repeated, as if tasting the name. You don't look like the gala type. How refreshing. Elena's skin prickled. He said it like an insult disguised as charm. Alexander stepped slightly closer, his presence a shield. She's a guest, he said firmly. That should be enough. Richard's smirk widened. Of course, a guest. He tipped his glass before strolling back inside, leaving behind a trail of unease. Elena released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. What was that? Richard, Alexander said simply. He doesn't like when someone else has the spotlight. Tonight, that was you. Her pulse raced. But why would he care about me? Because you matter to me right now, Alexander said, eyes steady on hers. And Richard will use anything he can to get under my skin. The honesty in his words disarmed her. She wanted to step back, to protect herself, but something rooted her in place. Before she could answer, music swelled again inside. Alexander extended his hand. One more dance. This time, she didn't hesitate. Back in the ballroom, the second dance was different. Less performance, more intimacy. The crowd blurred, her awareness narrowing to the warmth of his hand on her back and the quiet steadiness in his eyes. For the first time all evening, Elena wasn't thinking about who was watching. She was thinking only of him. But the moment couldn't last. As the night drew to a close and guests began filtering out, Alexander walked her toward the coat check. Lila had already left with friends, promising to text later. Elena felt strangely exposed, like she was stepping out of a dream. At the exit, Alexander paused. "Do you trust me?" She blinked. "I don't know. I barely know you." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Fair answer. Then let me say this instead. Be careful who you talk to after tonight. If Richard approaches you, walk away." "Why? What is he planning?" A car pulled up outside, sleek and black, clearly his. He held the door open for her, ignoring her question. "Some things are safer not to know." "Not yet." She hesitated. Then, against her better judgment, she slid into the car. The ride back to her apartment was quiet, city lights streaking past the tinted windows. Elena sat tense, torn between exhilaration and fear. "You don't belong in his world," Alexander said suddenly. "That's what makes you dangerous to him. He can't predict you. And you can." She asked softly. His eyes met hers, unwavering. "I'd like to try." Her breath caught. Something unspoken passed between them, fragile and electric. When the car stopped at her building, Alexander stepped out first, offering his hand. She took it, her pulse racing. On the steps, he paused, as if weighing a decision. "Elena," his voice was low, rougher now. "If I call, will you answer?" She didn't trust herself to speak, so she nodded. He released her hand slowly, reluctantly, before returning to the car. The engine roared to life, carrying him away into the night. Elena stood there long after the taillights disappeared, her heart still tangled with his warning. Days passed, but the gala refused to leave her mind. Whispers of Alexander Grant and Richard Hale appeared in the news, rumors of a brewing rivalry, deals collapsing, investigations looming. She tried to focus on work at the gallery, but she couldn't forget the way Alexander had looked at her. Then, one evening, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Meet me. Tonight. Same terrace." Her heart leapt and sank at once. She should have ignored it. She should have stayed safe. But she didn't. When she arrived, the terrace was empty except for Alexander, leaning against the railing as if he'd been waiting hours. His expression softened at the sight of her. "You came." "I shouldn't have," she said honestly. "Probably not." His mouth curved faintly. "But I'm glad you did." They stood close, the city below them, silence stretching like a fragile thread. Finally, Elena asked the question burning in her chest. "Why me, Alexander? Out of everyone, why choose me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice low. "Because when I look at you, I see the one thing money can't buy. Something real." Her breath hitched. She wanted to resist, to protect herself from the storm she felt gathering around him. But when his hand brushed hers, she didn't pull away. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then he kissed her, slow, deliberate, as if sealing a promise. Elena melted into him, every doubt drowned by the certainty of that moment. But when they finally parted, Alexander's expression was grave. "This won't be easy," he murmured. "Richard won't stop. He'll use you if he can. If you stay near me, you'll be a target." Elena searched his eyes. Then let him try. Something fierce flickered in his gaze, as though her answer had lit a fire in him. For the first time, Alexander Grant, untouchable billionaire, wasn't untouchable at all. And Elena knew her life had changed forever.